Hello everyone, it's time for cheese knife activity again. I'm doing an unboxing today of Charade Maniacs. Here is the game, and it's of course a visual novel from the well-known brand Otomate, which is published by Idea Factory International. And they were kind enough to send me a limited edition. So what better way to enjoy it than to do an unboxing and also talk a bit about the game. There are some interesting points I have to make. So let me just get the cellophane off so we don't have that reflection. A stylishly designed box, exactly what I would expect from an Idea Factory limited edition. As you know, I've done a lot of unboxings of Idea Factory games and special editions so far. So I think I've got a good foundation of being able to compare with regard to quality of production and design, and the contents, of course. Now, before we go any further, I need to point out something with regard to the limited edition and a separate Day 1 edition, which, as far as I can see, is not available on the North American store, but is available on the European and UK store. As far as I can tell, the contents of the limited edition for both regions are exactly identical. However, they've done something slightly unusual with the Day 1 edition, which I would normally expect to be a slimmed down version with maybe a soft cover art book and a disc of a soundtrack or something. For this Day 1 edition, in Europe only, they included a special item. It's called a futuristic bracelet. Now that features very importantly in the game, where it's called a bangle. And I'll put the picture in so you know what I'm talking about. I have to admit, I quite fancied that bangle. And when I realised it was not included in the limited edition, I was just a wee bit disappointed. So I checked with my local retailer here in New Zealand, because they are also offering this Day 1 edition, and they investigated and told me that no, the bangle is not included. They are not getting it in their distribution line. Don't ask me, but what I'm saying is, if instead of the bigger and more expensive limited edition, you are maybe interested in the Day 1 edition, please check carefully with your retailer whether that special item is actually included or not, because you might expect it, and if it's not there, you'd be disappointed. That was a little bit of my detective work I wanted to share. So, Charade Maniacs, it's either charade or, if you're in North America, it's charade. Both are correct. I'm sticking with what I'm used to, so it's charade for me. This title is another one with a strong science fiction story. We've had other ones before, and this one sort of follows a bit in that tradition. I will talk more about that as we go through the game structure, how it works. So let's have a look at the items. This 10-card double-sided bromides set contains major spoilers for the main story. Please open the envelope only after clearing the game. And someone forgot the E at the end of envelope. That would not have passed my proofreading skills. Okay, I shall inspect that and determine. They have to be, of course, extremely cautious. That's why these dire warnings are issued. Sometimes they're warranted, sometimes we might be able to share 1 or 2 cards. So the bromides or art cards feel and look very, very close to actual high-quality photographs. Very nicely done, obviously using CGI stills from the game. And it's basically your character on the front. And I don't think there's any spoiler here. He's one of the 9 romanceable characters. And on the back is a scene from the final closing moments, which I would call the romantic scene. Maybe a kiss, maybe hand-holding, one of those. Idea Factory, as you'll probably know from my other unboxing videos, always do good steelbooks. That's what I expect from them. So let's have a close look at this one. So you probably noticed a bit of reflectiveness there. And it's shiny where the silver is, which gives a sort of attractive effect as you move it. And the back just has the title. Plus, you might notice a tiny round figure there near the bottom. That is a bouncer. And I won't say much more. They appear in the game and have a reasonably important role. So as you see, the cover of the steelbook shows 9 characters, and those are the 9 male characters who are romanceable. So there's a separate storyline, a separate arc or route for each one of these 9 characters, and the main protagonist around whom everything revolves is female. I hesitated about 9 male characters because one character's gender is indeterminate. He is reticent and a bit teasing about disclosing which way he goes. So that's quite an interesting inclusion for a Japanese game. Not totally unusual anymore, but not that commonplace either, especially since visual novels do tend to stick to a more traditional line, I think, where gender relations are concerned, and romance, there's nothing. If you've never played a visual novel, or not many, in the otome, that's the romance genre, you need not fear any kind of suggestiveness or anything that would go beyond the bounds of good taste. Japanese games tend to be very, very modest in their approach. So characters holding hands is already a serious matter, and a kiss is usually the final seal for a decision to form a relationship. And here's the disc, which is called Curtain Call, and it is not an original soundtrack disc, but there are 2 audio dramas on it called Find Your Sweetheart and Welcome to Charade Maniacs Cafe. This drama CD contains in-game spoilers, etc. Yes, I obviously would only listen to that once I finished the game. So we know that audio drama CDs have been and still are very popular in Japan to provide extra content, bonus content. In the West, we haven't had them that much. I actually think in this case, this is the right decision. While the game has a very catchy, pleasant tune as the opening theme, and likewise a very pleasant closing theme, the background music throughout this visual novel, which was provided by Tokyo Logic, is not the sort of thing I would be interested in having on a separate CD and putting on and listening to, because it is specifically tailored to be background for a visual novel, for this specific one, which means it's very suitable for the particular purpose of accompanying the story arcs of this game. And remember that visual novels are almost completely dialogue, and a lot of the dialogue is voiced, by the way. Not all of it, but a significant amount. The music has to blend in and support what is being talked about, what is happening. I personally don't think it would make for really riveting listening as separate game music. I'm much happier having a drama CD that gives me a bit more insight into the characters I've got to know. I'm quite thrilled about that because I don't have many drama CDs. The ones I have are in Japanese, which is kind of difficult for me. So I'm really excited about this. So that's the drama CD, all designed in the style of the game and associated materials. A very nice colour palette, very much pastels, as you probably noticed, with a very light rosé, pink being one important colour. You'll see it more in some of the still shots I'll be showing you, and the other one is a very light pastel green. So before we have a look at the art book and the extra booklet, I just mentioned the voice acting, and I just want to say that I found the voice acting good across the board. It helped to really bring the characters alive, which is the important thing about voice acting. They all performed really well without trying to grandstand or anything. They really got into character, and even though I don't understand Japanese, it came across very well. So full marks to the voice cast. You won't be hearing much of it, that's why I mention it, because I decided I will only really show you still shots from the game.
ざけんなよ。
ケイちゃん。
ふざけんなと言ったんだ。全員のんびり構えてばかりで現実見えてないだろ。
またいつもの発作か。
エヴァナっていかにもクールメガネって顔してんのに。
To try and control that you don't see any spoilerish material. You know, I do my very best. It's difficult, of course, with a visual novel, which is all about the story and the characters, but it should be possible to avoid anything that will really give the game away, so to speak. You also get a little trading card with your limited edition. Very cute, slightly embossed and glossy, and of course it shows the female protagonist in the centre and the 9 other characters, most of them male, circled around her. So here's a booklet called The Next Act, and I would expect there's some extra material in there for reading. And as far as I can tell, it's basically a drama enactment in the style of what happens in the game. So now the all-important art book, Behind the Curtain, and it contains details on all the characters, relationship charts, rough drafts, Bangle design. They are teasing me. And a dictionary, character name information, etc., and credits. So, major spoilers ahead warning as usual. I'll have a quick look and determine what might be safe to show. How can I tell? Because I have played 2 routes so far. I just finished the second one just before starting this video, so it's all fresh in my mind. There are 4 pages for each male character. So a lot of visual and some text information, which I will not show you. You will be able to see some of the romanceable characters in the shots I'll be showing you. What I will show you is the female protagonist, Hiyori Sena. A sophomore at Geke High School, she has a childhood friend called Tomose, and I'll be talking about him just a little bit. She's always trying her best at everything she does. These are the quintessential Japanese rules for social harmony that Hiyori strongly believes in. Just before summer break, she and her childhood friend, Banjo, met a strange man and were suddenly... And that is the big mystery of the game. They are, as you can imagine, and you might have seen in some of the trailers and promotional material, spirited away to a very strange and very different world called Arcadia. But now nothing can be taken for granted any longer. And I think now's the right moment to mention that the artist who did all the character designs is Tater. Now, you may have come across his designs before, because one visual novel we've also had published in the West called Norn 9 also had Tater designs. So this is a well-produced art book, 68 pages, so not huge, but there's a fair amount of illustration and information in there. The pages are good, thick quality. The print quality looks good. It's semi-gloss, and the colours look very natural. Yep, I'll definitely enjoy having that by my side while I play through the remaining 7 routes. Now, on the back of the art book, you see the text circling around there, and that already gives you a further clue to the background of the story. It also appears in small print on the back of the box. It says, "Who can you trust?" And that is a major theme running through the story. Who can you trust? Can you trust someone who might be a traitor? Now, as I started the story, I was pretty quickly gripped by the science fiction setting, the being whisked away to another world. It's not quite time travel, or at least I don't know at this stage. I don't think it is, but it's travel of some sort into a different or parallel type of world. And our 10 characters are stuck there, being forced to perform in television-type dramas which are being live-streamed to an audience. And I'm not going to explain any further who or what the audience is. But the important thing that is being explained very early on in the game, so we're talking prologue in chapter 1, I'm not going beyond that one person is definitely cooperating with the abductors, so it's basically a traitor. But possibly there is more than one. So that's what they have been told. This is a scenario that should sound fairly familiar if you are at all familiar with Danganronpa. That was the first game and story that sprang to my mind. The other facet of the story will probably strike you as quite familiar as well in terms of genre, because our poor stranded cast of characters are faced with ever more difficult performances they have to complete, with danger of being eliminated just around the corner. I won't go into detail about what might happen to them, what punishments happen. You may remember in Danganronpa the horrible punishments that Monokuma exacts. Well, things get quite desperate here as well. So we're basically dealing with what I call a death game scenario. And you're probably, even if you've never played a visual novel or don't know about Danganronpa, you may have seen Squid Game. Or you may know a very good Japanese show called Alice in Borderland, also firmly in the death game category. So this visual novel is riffing on all these themes and using that genre support structure. But the story itself, I'd have to say, is unusual, and that's what kept me going.
Charade Maniacs.
So as I started playing the game, I was sort of looking for what we call a common route that then at some point usually stops and the option for the various branches becomes available following separate character routes. That's how most visual novels are structured. Sometimes you get a shorter common route which ends and you get a sort of default ending that amplifies the background and setting, and then you move on to the various branches. So I wasn't quite sure which type of structure I was dealing with, and I kept playing and I thought, well, I'll just take it easy, just follow what interests me where I had to make choices and not worry too much. And I sort of got the impression that there was a common route that just went on, and there is a flow chart, and I checked it in between and it always said common route, and I thought, well, I'll just keep going. It wasn't until I came to chapter 7 that it became evident that there was a final divergence, and you at that point pretty clearly had to make a choice whose route you wanted to explore. And I finished the route for the character called Akase. And I was pretty happy with that because it gave me some further insight into the mystery and what had been happening, just a little bit, enough to whet my appetite and think, well, I'll have to obviously go through all the other routes to figure out all the different bits and pieces like a kaleidoscope to fit them together so I get the overall story. And I wouldn't be surprised if there isn't also possibly a separate true ending to tie everything together, because honestly 9 routes is a lot. Most visual novels restrict themselves to 5 or 6 routes, so 9 is a lot to tackle. Now, if you want a big, beefy visual novel that will keep you going for a long time, hello, here you are. This should keep you busy for quite a while. Now, when I completed that particular character route, Akase, I thought, I wonder, because the game in the beginning had gently nudged me in the direction of a childhood friend who's called Tomose. Looking at him, his personality is possibly one of the least inviting or accessible. He is very possessive towards our female character, Senna. He's very convinced of his own opinions. He's always very stern. At first glance, he is not what you would call immediately attractive. Now, here I want to explain something about how I approach reading and playing a visual novel. In the end, it is not really about how I personally feel about this particular character. It's a story. I'm not gonna marry that guy, but our character Hiri Senna, she might. It's going to be an important part of her young life and growing up, the kind of romantic love relationship she has with a guy. I see it as the player, as my job to try and see things from the main character's perspective. That is who I am empathizing with, and I'm trying to work through who would be a good person to match her up with. This means that once I adopt that approach, I see a lot of what happens from a variety of angles, which actually deepens my understanding and my appreciation of what the game is about. Rather than just saying, "Oh, I don't like this guy, I'm not going to play his route." You're not doing yourself a service with that kind of approach. I sometimes see that these games are actually trying to deal with often difficult questions about social relations, our place in the world, etc. So I'm just saying, take it seriously and try and see how people can work together, form relationships, and maybe fall in love. We all have our personal reactions to anything that happens in a game, whether it's an RPG or an adventure game or a visual novel. With a story-heavy game that relies on good character development, obviously our personal reactions might sometimes run away with us, but I think it's important to sort of rein them in and say, no, I'm going to have a look whether that character might work out. And that's exactly what I did today when I played my second route, which I think on reflection should have been my first route. I will explain. I picked a childhood friend, and as expected, he was pretty objectionable in the beginning, but I was super pleased to see that Sena, who is a very quiet and accommodating young female, but not what I would call a timid little mouse, if you know what I mean, she does stand up to him. They're in an environment unlike back home, where their life is at stake, basically, and she finds the courage to speak her mind and make decisions, and you see her growing through that process. And as a result, childhood friend Tomose does change as well. And whether you like the way it's done and the outcome, I thought it was interesting, and I thought it was pretty convincing. Difficult. It's a difficult one to pull off, I'd have to say. I'm really, really glad I played that one. Despite my initial reaction to Tomose being, the heavy-handed guy, and I'm, as a female, and most females, we really don't like that. I would recommend, and this is a mini spoiler of sorts, but I would really recommend, if you can, if you're that way inclined and don't mind, play his route first. Because there is an event, something happens in that route that I didn't see in the other route, and I'd been puzzling all along, you see, why on earth is it called Charade Maniacs? And that route with childhood boyfriend Tomose explains why it's called Charade Maniacs, the title. It's a very interesting part of the story. The mystery doesn't get solved at the end, oh no, but I'm one step closer. And I really, really would like to know what's behind it all. So I hope that's shown you a little bit about how I approach playing a visual novel, and a little tip about maybe where to start. I would say it's not a difficult visual novel to play, not so far. The structure is made clear fairly early on, and if you have a close look at the flow chart, which is accessible from the title menu, and study it carefully, you will see exactly how the structure is broken up. If you happen to have played Norn 9, you will already be familiar with this approach where, okay, I'm giving something away here. It's not a biggie, honestly. You know, you've got 9 character roots. They're bundled into 3 groups of 3. That's all I'm saying. If you keep that in mind, then you've got a very clear idea of what you need to do to fulfill certain conditions to be able to progress. Because that's usually a sticking point. If that's too cryptic and you can't figure it out, it can cause frustration in visual novels. We have seen that in the past. And then you need to consult a guide and it gets complicated. You know, it destroys the fun a bit. This visual novel is very open, transparent and clear-cut about how it works and how it's structured. With just a tiny bit of effort, you can easily work it out. So I think that's positive. So I've talked about the many, to my mind, positive aspects of this game. But wouldn't you know it, there is one fly in the ointment. And I'm afraid I have to be picky here and pinpoint the translation. While the story premise and initial events had me instantly interested, I got hobbled a bit at various times by stumbling over words and phrases that were just awkward and clunky. It's anything from just ordinary typos, which you can just, we all skate over. But if there are too many, it just gets a bit annoying. But then you see certain expressions that just don't sound natural in English. Please note that these are only a tiny handful of examples. The whole text is strewn with these types of infelicities. It's just awkward because for a moment, it pulls you out of the immersion and you don't want that when you're reading a story. And there were too many of those for me to pass it over. A good final editorial cleanup process should have been able to pick out those things and have them rectified, but I'm not sure that's happened because I don't see any evidence of it. Okay, I'm being quite critical here, but you have to understand my background because I'm an ex-translator. I used to work for many years in the translation business, so I can't switch it off. My brain just works that way, that I notice things instantly that other people might just pass over, and if you point it out, they might say, oh yes, I didn't really notice that. So I would like you to take it in that spirit, that if you're very sensitive about language and you don't like stumbling over words and expressions, then you have to be aware that will sometimes happen, no doubt. But if you're the easygoing type, then I don't think it'll be a problem, because the important thing is I was never at any point in any doubt as to what had happened or what the characters really wanted to say. So overall, I would say the translation is not very good, but neither is it particularly bad. There are some infelicities there, and I had a couple of occasions where something happened that I call a non sequitur, where what one character said was not quite clear enough or possibly misleading because of the awkward wording, and then left to another character replying, and you think, well, that doesn't make any sense. How did they get from that statement to that statement? Ideally shouldn't happen, but these things obviously do happen. So that is what my one and only critique so far of this visual novel. Otherwise, everything is put together very well. The art style, the music, the presentation, the menu, the UI is all well done. Having 9 separate routes means that for my taste, because I'm the impatient kind, as you know, for my taste, they're spinning the story out, they're dragging it out a bit long because they can only reveal so much in each character route, so I'm sort of gasping a bit to find out more. Fortunately, the more you play, the easier it gets with each route to use the skip function for scenes you've already read and just focus on the ones that are new to you, as we usually do in visual novels, and that's the kind of setup and feature we expect, and it works just fine. About the user interface, the only thing I would have liked to have is access to the flow chart, not just from the title menu, but possibly also while you're playing, because that's when I sometimes thought, do I go this way or that way? How does it stack up? Or where's the branching happening? You can sometimes look ahead a bit and see where there might be a termination point and where other branches go off. No doubt, as you get closer towards finishing all the routes, well, there will be a bit of a spaghetti junction to go through and to figure out what you haven't covered yet. So if I want to do that, I have to back out and go back to the title page, which is a slight inconvenience. I just thought I'd mention that. So I hope this was a useful unboxing and overview for you in your decision making. Let me know if you intend to get the game. Have you played any other visual novels that might be a bit similar, especially with a science fiction story? The one that to my mind comes closest that you might also enjoy would be Norn 9, which I played on the Vita many years ago, but it is now available. It came out this year, I think, on the Switch. As I've mentioned before in other videos, I like hybrid otome romance novels. I'm not into novels that are 100% romance. I'm afraid I'm too much into adventure and excitement and mystery and those types of things. So I like having a really good story and plot interwoven with the romance elements. And the romance isn't tacked on, it is an organic part of the story, and I always think that's important. I think I've gone on long enough, so in closing I would like to thank Idea Factory for sending me the limited edition all the way to New Zealand. Thank you very much to all of you for taking the time to watch. Let me know your thoughts. Please keep well. I'm Food for Dogs. Bye-bye.